The lighthouse at Starry Cove, at the furthest reaches of the world, where maps curled and faded and the winds softened to a hush, there was a small peninsula shaped like a sleeping cat, curled around a cove so still, even the waves whispered. At the very tip of this quiet land stood a lighthouse, round, tall, and serene, with walls made of whitewashed stone that caught the moonlight like snow. The lighthouse had stood there for almost 100 years, weathering salt winds, golden summers, and long violet winters. It wasn't grand or imposing. In fact, it had the softness of something beloved. Ivy growing up its base, little tufts of grass poking through the stone path leading to its door, and wind chimes made from shells hanging above the window shutters. Inside the lighthouse lived Elliot, the keeper. He was a gentle man with hair the color of mist and a beard flecked with white. He wore thick wool sweaters that always smelled faintly of cinnamon and the sea. Every morning, he brewed tea in a ceramic kettle shaped like a puffin, and every evening he wound the great brass lantern atop the lighthouse, humming old sailor songs no one remembered anymore. Elliot wasn't alone. He lived with Thimble, a tiny gray cat who had been born beneath the lighthouse stairs on a thunderstorm night. She was small and soft and liked to sleep in the crook of Elliot's neck or on his workbench beside the driftwood carvings he made in the quiet hours. On this particular morning, as golden light spilled in through the round windows and painted the wooden floorboards in warm stripes, Elliot sat at the kitchen table whittling a miniature boat. Thimble lay curled in a patch of sunlight, one paw twitching as she dreamed. "Looks like calm weather today," Elliot murmured, glancing at the pale blue sky. "Maybe I'll walk to the cliff and check the tide pools later." Thimble offered a chirp but didn't open her eyes. Outside, the sea sighed in its sleep, and far above, gulls circled in slow arcs. The lighthouse, quiet and ancient, stood watching, as it always had, the edge of the world. The midday sun climbed lazily into the sky, casting soft shadows along the path that led from the lighthouse to the edge of the cove. Elliot donned his worn boots, the ones with driftwood buttons instead of laces, and slung a canvas satchel over his shoulder. Thimble stretched, yawned with a high-pitched squeak, and leapt gracefully onto the windowsill to watch him go. "I won't be long," Elliot promised, placing a soft kiss on the crown of her head. "Guard the lighthouse for me, would you?" With a flick of her tail, Thimble resumed her perch, eyes half closed but ears alert. The path to the tide pools was narrow and winding, framed by sea grasses and tiny purple flowers that bobbed in the breeze. Each step crunched softly on the gravel and shells embedded in the earth. Elliot's satchel held a small net, a tin of tea biscuits, and an old, leather-bound journal in which he liked to sketch whatever oddities the sea had left behind. As he walked, he hummed the tune of Star of the Sea, an old ballad his grandmother used to sing when storms rolled in. The wind, light and playful, seemed to pick up the melody and carry it ahead of him, brushing over the cliffs like fingers trailing through hair. Reaching the tide pools, Elliot crouched by the water's edge. The pools glittered like scattered mirrors, each holding a tiny world within. There were anemones with soft pink arms waving like dancers, small crabs skittering under stones, and starfish clinging stubbornly to the rocks. Elliot opened his journal and began to draw. A barnacle-covered stone shaped like a sleeping dragon, a blue shell that shimmered like sapphire, and a curious pattern of seaweed that seemed to spiral in perfect rings. As he worked, a breeze stirred, different from before. It wasn't harsh, but it carried a peculiar scent, lavender and salt, with something faintly sweet, like honey on warm toast. Elliot paused, his pencil hovering above the page. From behind him came a sound. Not quite a voice, not quite the wind. A whisper. "Elliot!" He stood slowly, scanning the cliffs. No one. The wind sighed again, more clearly this time. "Soon," it said. "Soon. The dreams will come." Elliot's heartbeat quickened, not with fear, but with that strange old feeling he hadn't had since childhood. The sense that something was about to happen, something beyond the ordinary. He closed his journal, tucked it gently into his satchel, and cast one last look at the tide pools before beginning the walk home. The wind followed him, quiet now, as if satisfied. Back at the lighthouse, Thimble was still on the windowsill, her tail flicking thoughtfully. "I heard something strange today," Elliot said softly as he removed his boots. "A voice, a promise." Thimble blinked slowly and pressed her nose to his hand. Outside, dusk crept gently over Starry Cove, and far out at sea, something shimmered. Evening settled like a warm shawl over the cove, soft and comforting. The sky turned shades of rose and peach, then faded to a dusky lilac as the first stars blinked awake. Elliot stood at the base of the spiral staircase inside the lighthouse, a mug of steaming lavender tea in his hands. The walls of the stairwell curved like the inside of a seashell, painted with hundreds of tiny brush strokes. Little constellations painted by Elliot over the years. Some nights, when sleep wouldn't come, he'd add a new star or a curling swirl of clouds. He always painted by candlelight, listening to the creak of the lighthouse beams and the distant song of the sea. "Time to light the lantern, Thimble," he murmured. The cat followed close behind, tail high and twitching as she padded up the stairs with him. At the top of the tower, the lantern room waited like a crown atop the lighthouse. It was round and glassy, windows looking out over the darkening waves in every direction. The great brass lantern sat in the center, motionless for now, wrapped in silence. Elliot opened a hatch in the base of the lantern and struck a long match. The flame flickered, catching the edge of the wick. Slowly, golden light blossomed from the heart of the glass chamber, warm and steady. The mirrors around it began to spin, creaking gently, casting wide beams across the sea. One beam caught a gull in flight. Another glinted off the smooth black water. The cove shimmered with the touch of the light. Elliot and Thimble stood quietly, watching the rotation. "There," Elliot said softly. "All safe again tonight." Thimble purred and wound around his ankles. They lingered, as they always did, in the glow. Elliot took a slow sip of his tea, breathing in the floral steam. "I used to think this light was for sailors," he said aloud. "But maybe it's for more than ships. Maybe it keeps dreams safe, too." Outside, the wind stirred, not harsh or cold, but filled with meaning, like it carried words just on the edge of hearing. Thimble's ears perked. She padded to the window and placed one paw against the glass. From far off in the night, over the horizon, something was moving. Not a boat, not a bird, but a slow, glimmering shape, low to the water and glowing like starlight. Elliot narrowed his eyes. "That's no ship," he whispered. He watched as the shape faded into the dark, swallowed by distance, but not before he glimpsed it clearly. A small, silent boat, drifting without oars, made of what looked like sea glass and moonlight. Elliot's heart beat slowly but strongly. He felt it again, that quiet pull toward something mysterious and wonderful. Tomorrow, he knew, the wind would bring more than whispers. He placed a gentle hand on Thimble's back. "We should get some rest," he said. "I think something's coming." And far below, the waves continued their lullaby, endless and soft. Morning returned with a hush. Clouds hung low over the cove, pale and heavy with sea mist. The sky wore a muted gray-blue coat, and the waves lapped at the shore with extra patience, as though they too were still waking. Elliot stepped onto the lighthouse porch, his mug warm in his hands. Thimble followed close, her tail brushing his leg. The mist curled around them like silk, wrapping the cliffs, the path, even the sea, in gentle mystery. He squinted into the fog. The previous night's vision tugged at his thoughts. The boat made of sea glass, the glow, the whispering wind. "Did we dream it?" he asked Thimble. She gave a small meow and leapt onto the railing, peering into the mist. They both saw it at once. A shape, faint and quiet, moving toward the cove shore. Elliot set down his tea. His boots thudded softly on the stairs as he walked down toward the path. Each footstep crunched against the gravel, muffled by fog. Thimble followed, tail flicking in perfect time. As he neared the beach, the shape came into focus. The same boat as before, delicate and impossible, bobbing gently in the shallows. Its hull shimmered with translucent colors like morning dew on a dragonfly's wing. Tiny beads of light danced along its edges, twinkling like stars caught in a bottle. In the boat sat a child. Their skin glowed like moonlight on fresh snow, hair silver white, falling in gentle waves to their shoulders. They wore a robe of mist and starlight, stitched with patterns that seemed to change when Elliot wasn't looking directly at them. The child looked up and smiled, not broadly, but with quiet knowing. "I hoped you would come," Elliot said, though he didn't quite know why. "I've been watching," the child replied. Their voice was soft and musical, like chimes moved by a breeze. "The lighthouse sings, 'Dreams gather here.'" Thimble padded up beside Elliot and gave a sharp little chirp, her version of a greeting. The child reached out a pale hand. Thimble sniffed it, then rubbed against it affectionately, accepting the visitor. "What is your name?" Elliot asked. "I have many," the child said, "but you may call me Lyra." Elliot glanced at the boat, still glowing faintly. "You came across the sea?"
Lyra nodded.
"From the dreaming deep, where stars sleep beneath waves and stories float on the tide." The wind stirred. Lyra looked up, face calm. "I have something to give you." From within their robe, they drew a pouch no bigger than a shell. It shimmered in Elliot's eyes like it was woven from morning fog and moon thread. "What is it?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Dreams," Lyra said, "and you are their keeper." Elliot took the pouch gently, as though it might melt or float away if he held it too tightly. The material felt impossibly soft, like holding a piece of mist or catching a breath of cool wind in his hands. It weighed almost nothing, but inside, he sensed a quiet thrum of energy, something alive and ancient. He opened it slowly. Inside were things that weren't things, shapes that shifted, glimmering and delicate. Some looked like feathers made of moonlight, others like tiny fireflies flickering gold, blue, and violet. One seemed to be a perfectly formed snowflake, yet it didn't melt in the warmth of the day. "Each one is a dream," Lyra explained, "not just for sleep, but for hope, for wonder. They come from far beneath the sea, where the currents carry old wishes and half-remembered lullabies. They collect in quiet places. This lighthouse has been gathering them for years, and now they are ready." Elliot gazed down at the pouch, awe softening his weathered features. "And what should I do with them?" he asked. Lyra's smile returned, small and mysterious. "You'll know when the time is right." The wind ruffled their silver hair. Thimble rubbed herself against Elliot's leg, then jumped lightly into the boat as if to say, "We're not done here yet." Elliot hesitated. "Do you need to go so soon?" Lyra looked out over the sea. "I cannot stay long. I belong to the tide, but I will return." They placed a finger on Elliot's wrist, light as the brushing of a moth's wing. "You are not alone in this," they said. "Others will come, as they always have, drawn to the light. And when night falls again, the dreams must be released. The world is waiting." Elliot nodded slowly. "Then I'll be ready." Lyra stepped back into the boat, and without sails or oars, it began to drift. Not pushed by water or wind, but as though the very sea knew to carry them away. The mist began to lift, the sun climbing higher, casting a golden sheen across the cove. Elliot stood in silence for a long while, the pouch held close to his chest. The air was filled with the hush of waves, the kind of silence that only exists after something beautiful passes through. When he turned back toward the lighthouse, he felt something shift inside him. Not a change exactly, but a remembering, as if some old part of him had finally woken up. Thimble trotted ahead, tail high, leading the way. Back at the lighthouse, Elliot set the pouch in a small wooden box lined with velvet. He placed it beside the oil for the lantern and his old journal, the tools of a keeper. "Tonight," he said softly to Thimble, "we begin." Twilight crept back to Starry Cove, painting the sky in deep shades of amber and indigo. The sea took on a velvet sheen, smooth and shadowed, broken only by the slow sweep of gulls returning to their cliffs. Inside the lighthouse, Elliot moved with quiet purpose. He polished the brass of the great lantern until it shone like a second sun. He cleaned the glass panes with a soft cloth, humming an old lullaby as he worked. The melody wound through the rafters, floating out through the windows and into the cooling air. Thimble watched from atop a bookshelf, tail swaying in rhythm. Once the light was ready, Elliot went to the wooden box. He opened it slowly, reverently. The pouch of dreams shimmered in the dimming light, pulsing gently, as though it too had felt the shift in the world, the return of night. Elliot untied the drawstring. A single dream lifted from the pouch on its own. A soft, glowing thread that floated upward like a dandelion seed on a breeze. It hovered, dancing in place, waiting. Elliot watched, unsure. And then he knew. He opened the small hatch at the base of the lantern, just as he always did. But this time, instead of oil and flame alone, he reached out and guided the dream thread into the chamber. The moment it entered the light, the lantern flared, not harshly, but with warmth and wonder. The beams that rotated outward were no longer just beams of gold and white. Now they shimmered with color, shifting and curling like ribbons in the sky. Hints of blue, silver, soft green, the colors of dreams, of imagination and memory. Outside, the light swept across the sea, and as it passed over the sleeping village beyond the hills, a child turned in their sleep, a smile rising on their face as they dreamed of flying with whales through starlit skies. Further still, a lonely fisherman sitting in his boat looked up and felt something stir in his chest, a warmth he hadn't known in years. He didn't know why, but he remembered his mother's song from childhood and began to hum. Back in the tower, Elliot watched the light spin. He didn't feel tired. He felt full. Thimble pressed her head to his leg and purred, a long, low sound of approval. "Well then," Elliot whispered, "that's one dream shared." And from within the pouch, another dream rustled, waiting its turn. The lighthouse at Starry Cove had always guided ships, but now it was something more. It was a beacon for dreams. Morning dawned with soft birdsong and golden fog drifting just above the water's surface. Elliot had barely slept, but he didn't feel weary. His heart held the same quiet thrill he'd felt as a boy on the morning of the solstice festival, as if something magical were just around the corner. Downstairs, Thimble batted gently at the pouch, which still rested inside the velvet-lined box. She gave it a curious sniff, then looked up at Elliot as if to ask, "Well?" He chuckled. "Yes, all right. Let's see what's next." He carefully lifted the pouch again. When he opened it this time, a dream floated upward. This one not shaped like a thread or a feather, but like a glowing note of music. It wavered, hovering in place, and then it began to sing. It wasn't a melody Elliot recognized. The sound was unlike any human instrument, more like water over stones or wind through pine needles, threaded with something older, deeper. It didn't just echo in the room. It echoed in him. Thimble's ears swiveled toward the sound, and she gave a pleased trill in response. Elliot stood perfectly still, his eyes closing as he listened. The tune danced through the lighthouse like light through stained glass, touching old places inside him, half-buried memories, long-forgotten dreams of stargazing and laughter and long walks under silver moons. When he opened his eyes, the dream note drifted toward the lighthouse stairs. He followed. Up in the lantern room, the dream curled around the great brass light and, of its own accord, nestled inside the chamber. The moment it touched the crystal housing, a low hum began. Not loud, not constant, but steady, like a lullaby playing just beneath the world. The light spun again, and this time the dream it carried was a song. Out over the hills, a young artist in a village studio stirred from a sleepless night. She looked up, blinked, and found herself sketching faster than ever before, drawing what she'd only just begun to imagine. A bird made of galaxies, a window floating on clouds. In a nearby town, an elderly man stood on his porch and began to whistle, a tune he hadn't heard in 40 years, one his wife had once sung when she thought no one was listening. The light passed on, and the song spread. Elliot leaned against the glass of the lantern room, the dream's music weaving through his bones. "Each one is different," he murmured to Thimble, who sat beside him like a gray shadow. and each one knows where it needs to go. Thimble offered a quiet, knowing purr. Down below, the waves glimmered in the sunlight, and the lighthouse stood watching, keeper of the sea, and now, the world's sleeping symphony.